Thank you all for joining us. We'll get started shortly. We're going to give it another 3 minutes or so for more folks to join. But thank you again for joining us for this Lunch and Learn with John O'Neill. We're really excited to share a little bit about the process of how we got to this beautiful image that you're seeing on the screen that's glitching right now in front of you. Again, we'll get started in another 3 minutes or so. And thank you again for joining us.
I was planning on working from home, but I can come down. I can come down, you know.
Okay, I think let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all again for joining us. My name is Leandra Lesueur. I'm a visual artist, also the creative director at DisArt. Really excited to have this Lunch and Learn take place. Really thankful and grateful for John O'Neill for joining us with this and taking us through this process. We've actually been working on a project called The Art of Disruption, and what you are currently seeing on your screen is actually just a graphic, our logo that John helped us create. So I just want to give a brief image description for what you're seeing, and I'll just read that out loud. What you're seeing is white text on a Black background that reads The Art of Disruption with the art of on the top line and disruption at the bottom. The center letters of both lines, art and rup, are slightly detached from the letters on either side, forming a dip. The font style and thickness is different in each letter. The text is distorted by vertical lines that shift the position of the text slightly. And the image is a GIF that is moving. In the top left corner is the DisArt logo. And at the very bottom, under disruption on the bottom right, you see a DisArt project in white text. Again, thank you all for joining us. Just to give you a brief background of why we're here, DisArt, we've been putting together a lot of lunch and learns, virtual programming, as well as programming on the site at Hartside Park during Art Prize this year. For this project, The Art of Disruption, this is a preview of kind of the full project that we're hoping to release in New York City in late 2024. We have 28 artists that we've been working with. 10 of those artists are currently showing at Hartside Park. We will have 2 amazing events that are taking place this weekend. We'll have a community lunch at Hartside Park on Friday at noon. If anyone is available and would like to come and join us in celebrating what has taken place over the course of the past 2.5 weeks at Hartside Park. And then right after that, around 3 p.m. on Friday, we'll have a workshop by an artist, Jeff Casper, who is currently based in Queens, New York. Jeff will be with us for the whole weekend, so I hope you all can stop by and say hello, meet him, and also take part in the workshop. We'll also have a final performance on Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with an artist, Jerron Herman, who will be doing a movement-based performance. That would be really exciting. So if you're around, you've gotten your full kind of taste of Art Prize, but still have a little bit of energy in you left, please come out and join us for that. So these lunch and learns are a way for us to kind of invite you into this kind of background process on DisArt's end. We've been doing obviously a lot of creative work, but also a lot of admin work in the background to try to see things through and also question the ways in which not only does disruption have kind of on the front end, what you kind of see public facing, but also on the back end, like how are we disrupting hierarchy, structures, systems in place, but also how are we disrupting our like perceptions and thoughts and the ways that we are considering a lot of the things that go into how we make art, how we make an exhibition, how we produce something, how we program something, et cetera. It's been really wonderful to work with John on this project and thinking through the branding and really questioning what does disruption look like in branding, but also questioning with the logos that we are creating, like how do we actually question what is access, what does that look like, and how we can actually disrupt like that kind of thought process and how sometimes it can be this normative process. So really excited to have John with us today to go through this lunch and learn. And I'll pass it over to my co-conspirator, Lawrence Carter-Long, to say an intro and also read out some of our wonderful sponsors for this event.
Thank you, Leandra. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody again today. Thank you. Such an exciting project, and it's great to see it sort of be out there in the world. So I'm a middle-aged white man with sort of brownish gray hair and blue t-shirt that says support your local library on the back deck of where I live in Oakland, California. I am the co-director of DisArt along with our co-founder, Jill Vin. I'd like to thank Leandra for that setup and for all the work that she's doing, and our sponsors. We'd like to give thanks to the Ford Foundation, the Grand Rapids community, which has always been so good to us, and the work that we do at DisArt, Steelcase Incorporated, the National Endowment for the Arts, Art Prize, John O'Neill and everybody at Conduit Studios, Dégagé Ministries, Fast Signs, Sidecar Studios, SiteLab, who helped us with the exterior. I forget what we're calling it. The
Structure.
structure. That's the word I'm looking for. SiteLab and the structure, and the Spanish language internship project, or SLIP, at the University of Michigan. So pleasure to be with you here today. Back to you, Leandra.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Also, I should give a visual description of myself. I am a Black woman with a shoulder-length freeform locks that are currently in a ponytail. I'm wearing a camouflage long-sleeve t-shirt as well as a Notre Dame hat, which may upset a few people, and also have on 2 white pearl necklaces. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you again for being here. If you have any questions or anything you would like to state, please place them in the chat. Myself and Lawrence will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. And we will leave questions towards the end, but we also want this to be kind of an open dialogue. So if there is something that you really are interested in talking about and discussing, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure we'll get to it. And without further ado, I just want to introduce John O'Neill. A lot of you all on the call know John, an amazing human. I'm really grateful to be working with John and have met John and been working on this particular project with John, which has been so seamless and also has really put me in a space of kind of questioning my own thoughts around what is disruption, and also like questioning what is actually accessible in the ways that we view logos and branding. So John, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing this, and really excited for this presentation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So yes, I'm John O'Neill. For a visual description, I am a white male with hopefully still salt and pepper hair and wearing a blue shirt today and dark glasses. Today we're going to be talking disrupting norms, access, and branding, specifically looking at the design of the art of disruption identity and the thought process that went into that. Before I get into that process, I just want to give you a little bit background on myself. I'm the founder of Conduit. We are a graphic design and branding studio that is celebrating our 22nd year. And at Conduit, we really pride ourselves on creating beautiful brands and digital experiences. And I call out that word beautiful very, very intentionally. Because to us, something that is beautiful is something that is deeply meaningful and connects with our audience. It is also socially responsible. We only work for organizations that we truly believe in their mission. And yes, it is aesthetically beautiful. We are humans and we are aesthetic creatures. And so no amount of brand strategy without an aesthetic execution is going to be successful. It's only when those two things work hand in hand that we truly get something that is great. So today we're going to look at like how did we infuse those ideas and principles into the artist disruption. If you're not completely familiar with the artist disruption, it's a showcase of innovative works by Black and disabled artists. And this collection demonstrates the profound interplay between race and disability and shows the parallels in the history of activism and advocating for transformative change. In one of my first meetings with Leandra, this quote came up that I thought was deeply profound. It's from Florence Kennedy, and it says, "When a system of oppression has become institutionalized, it is unnecessary for individuals to be oppressive." And I think this is so important because when we think about the art of disruption, the 28 artists that we're working with, the work that you're going to see in the show itself is disruptive. But some of the real disruption that we're working on is sort of in the system itself. And so I think that's really important to acknowledge that there is both this public-facing side of the artist disruption as well as everything that's happening behind the scenes. And so much of the conversation that we had early on was, how can we influence museums and gallery culture to care about artists' needs? And how can organizations make decisions that reflect the communities that they're operating in? And how can we educate artists to navigate the art world? So when you go down to Hartside Park or Art Prize or any of the final exhibitions that will be part of the art disruption, you'll be viewing the final polished, finished work of the artists. So much of the artist disruption is beyond that, beyond the public showcase. This is not the first branding project that we have done with DisArt. A few years ago, we worked on a comprehensive rebranding of the organization. And when we worked on that, we were really focusing on both ADA compliance, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as these ideas that we came up with of hyper compliance. So where ADA guidelines say that the typeface on a business card needs to be at least 14 point, here we made it 50 point, going way beyond the guidelines, so that not only is it hyper legible, it's crossed over into being aesthetically beautiful. And so really here trying to balance like both compliance, but artistic execution, which especially with ADA guidelines, if any other designers are worked through it, that's not always the case. It really takes an extra effort to like balance compliance and aesthetic beauty. And so as we dove into the art of disruption, we asked ourselves, can we be disruptive by being hyper accessible? And as we began going down that thought experiment, it brought up, well, what would a hyper accessible logo look like? Well, the most legible would be if it was black and white. Left align is going to be easier to read than right or centered. A sentence typeface versus uppercase is going to be easier to read for everyone. And then probably the most legible typeface would be sort of a generic sans serif typeface. So what would that look like? Well, actually, it would look like the art world that we are sort of looking to disrupt. We are not calling out any one of these institutions for anything specifically that they have done or not done. This is just meant to show an audit of what the art world looks like today. And however, we're not calling out these institutions specifically. We are calling out the culture in general. So these hyper accessible logos all mask an art world that is currently hyper inaccessible. So that kind of brought us to a really interesting dilemma around, like, do we fit in with the art world, and what does being hyper accessible mean in terms of like visually fitting into the art world? And that led me to a quote that I actually heard from Martin Vinesky, but the original quote is from David Carson. And it was, "Don't confuse legibility with communication. just because something is legible doesn't mean that it communicates, and more importantly, doesn't mean it communicates the right thing. So this is a really interesting statement here because it sort of flies in the face of ADA guidelines, which really just focus on legibility. So is there a time where we would intentionally make something less legible, but by doing so, make sure that it communicates more? And it's just sort of an interesting balance here, and one that isn't really set up in like these typical accessibility guidelines, but it's a very interesting thing. So yeah, this challenge of, yeah, maybe it's less legible, but it communicates something more, more profound. So that also kind of led us to this other question of, do we disrupt the art world by perfectly fitting in or by radically standing out? So the logo on the left would be what would happen if we kind of followed the rest of the art world and made something that was hyper compliant, but you can kind of see that it also would sort of perfectly fit in without really disrupting anything that the rest of the art world is doing. Or do we begin kind of having a playful dialogue with legibility, and how far can we push it and pull it where it still is usable, but also communicates something that makes us stand out? As we were going down this thought experiment further, we began just looking at like, well, what is a hyper accessible typeface and what does it mean? So when you look at sort of a standard sans serif typeface, well, what is it? Well, it's a really rigid grid system that every letter conforms to. And what it gains in legibility and consistency, it loses in communication, in individuality. And that's much like the typical art audience that we see, mostly wealthy, white, and able-bodied. So here we have a group of letters that were never meant to work together. They each have their own personalities, their own quirks, and they just don't neatly fit together. Much like this Tom Olin photograph, the artist and the audience for Artist Disruption doesn't neatly fit together and conform to societal norms. So we developed an identity that itself disrupted some norms, using elegant but mismatched typefaces to help represent the people that don't traditionally fit into the museum and gallery system. In our early discussions with Leandra and the rest of the team, some of the words that kind of bubbled to the top of what we wanted it to stand for was artistic, edgy, innovative, resourceful, social, visionary, as well as eclectic and flexible. In thinking about being flexible, we developed a system that actually could grow and change over time. So there's multiple versions of the logo. There may not ever be an official version. Each time that you see it, it could be a little bit different. And it can also animate. We chose intentionally to visually stand apart from the system that we are looking to disrupt. And where the disruption of these norms, it doesn't just end with the identity. It really includes disrupting the physical space, cultivating a dialogue between disability and Black communities. And where the logo plays with legibility, the Art of Disruption on a whole is super compliant with accessible spaces and programming that DisArt is known for. We are even striving to infuse this accessibility into everything that we're doing. We're even researching the feasibility of art labels with Braille and even near-field communication-enabled audio descriptions. These are just experiments that we're currently working with, but we're really figuring out like sort of this balance of legibility and compliance, but also where do we need to be super, where do we have room to play, and where do we have areas that we need to be super compliant on, or even go beyond what anyone else is doing. And so that together created I think, a playful and evolving identity that is playing with the boundaries of legibility and communication, hyper compliance, and areas where we get playful. And that was sort of the thinking that took us down the route to get to this Art of Disruption and the preview that we've revealed for ArtPrize.
Thank you so much, John. I'm just going to get myself and Lawrence back spotlit. Sweet. And yeah, and I think, so what we were hoping with this is to kind of open it up to have this more informal dialogue around the process, as John explained, and also to talk a little bit about maybe even if some folks have some thoughts around their own kind of contemplation around access with branding, or anything that has gone into that, we open it up for questions. I also can respond to and just state while we're waiting for questions to come in or thoughts or comments. I just want to say thank you again, John, for that presentation and also for working with us on this. We have been working and dreaming about this this project since 2020, and whenever we would have these conversations with John, it was always a question of how do we get feedback from the artists, and consider like the artists' kind of thoughts around what we're doing, and the ways in which they are also responding to this process and to what we're bringing to, you know, this kind of disruption of the logo. And it was interesting to have artists respond around access and inaccessibility, et cetera, with the ways in which the logo was glitching. And I think what I really appreciated around that conversation is a question of discomfort that we have with things that are kind of shifting the narrative around what we consider to be accessible, non-accessible, and also how we consider accessibility outside of these understandings of physical disability. And I think the ways also in which John responded to those questions or concerns from even from some of our artists was something that I really was dear to me, because it was a consideration of, yeah, like how do we talk about these kind of outside, I guess, like factors that go into how we understand access, not just, again, being this like understanding of physical disability, but also considering the ways in which spaces are not accessible for folks based on their background, based on, you know, their kind of way of life, based on, you know, even capacity, and how folks hold other people based on, you know, invisible disabilities, et cetera. So I think for me, that was kind of a turning point in my, also in my way of thinking about this work and the ways in which we were kind of navigating it. So I just wanted to state that, put that on the table, and also just give John a big kudos and appreciation for that kind of challenge and I don't want to say confrontation, but that challenge for myself and also for the artists that were stating different comments.
Well, thank you. Yes, we've really enjoyed working with you as well. And yeah, I think we've been working on this since the beginning of the year, and it's been a really pleasurable process.
Amazing. Okay, so we have a few questions. I will read them from, let's start. Let's see. Okay, from Miranda. Hi, Miranda. Thank you so much for joining us. John mentioned that this is the intro into a project. Does the Art of Disruption have a multi-project / year plan? I guess I can answer that as well. Yes, so we are right now kind of in this entry point with the Art of Disruption. As mentioned earlier, we have 28 artists that we are currently actively working with. When I say working, we host internal kind of artist meetings, check-ins. It's almost like a friend group chat almost at this point. And we decided that it would be really beautiful as a way to honor Chris Smith, our founder, who unfortunately passed at the beginning of this year. And also as a way to kind of bring this work to Chris and Jill's hometown, a space where DisArt has had obviously so much support and uplift from the community, to think through what it would look like to bring a preview of this work to Grand Rapids. We were fortunate enough to get a lot of support from Art Prize in doing this, and also a lot of support and actually excitement from the artists that we're working with. So 10 of the artists that we're working with, actually I should say 11, because one of them is an actual collaborative duo. We're just kind of like all in. We had a few months to kind of gather and get these things going and together. And it was a big push, not only from our end, DisArt's end on the back end, from John's end, but also from the artist's end to kind of see this through, as well as with Paula Menta and Site Lab. So this is actually kind of the start. And I think in this process, what I'm realizing is that we're learning a lot about what is needed as we continue on. not necessarily thinking about the next step when we go to New York in 2024, and even beyond New York, going into 2025 and 2026, et cetera. Not thinking about this exhibition being this kind of grandiose gesture, but thinking about the lead up and the process into that lead up, what happens when we actually activate a space, but then also how do we sustain that activation, continue that dialogue. I mean, even right now, being at Hartside Park, every time we're present there, we are having conversations with the folks that call Hartside Park home or an extension of home, and asking them, like, what do they need? Like, what actually is happening right there, like today? And thinking through, obviously, the art making, the showcasing of the art as this kind of beginning point into a dialogue for things that may not even be art. Like, how do we kind of continue showing up in that space, continue activating that space, not necessarily for art, but for the people that call that space their community, and build relationships and try to figure out ways to integrate. Maybe there's not necessarily a final resolve to that, but just figuring out the ways in which a process can be in play, and we can be a part of that process and continue that process on for months and months to come. So this is an entry point. But we're hoping as we continue this work that we stay grounded and intentional about our participation and active presence in the communities that we are actually showcasing in and navigating with the artists and the artworks that we're bringing.
That also goes into the process of and the background of the art of disruption, in that many artists who had worked with other organizations have felt maybe taken advantage of, not involved in the process, or even had things happen where, like, the museum or gallery ended up somehow changing their work or displaying it differently than what they had approved up front. We are trying to take the absolute opposite approach with everything we do. The artists that are involved in every decision that we're making along the way, including discussions around the branding and everything that we're doing. So where other organizations have been sort of inaccessible, we are trying to make sure that everyone is involved and that in the whole process.
Yeah, we have a design question from Kevin Buist, and Kevin asks, the final design deviated from the strict ADA definition of legibility 1 sans serif font, but we ended up sticking with black and white. Kevin wonders, why is that? John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we did explore color, though in the end we did go back to black and white. I think a black and white identity has a very distinct feel to it. It's obviously like the most legible the most contrasty you can, but also I think from a personality point, it's very stripped back. But that also kind of relates to the fact that we are working with artists. So it's rare that you'll kind of see the identity completely on its own. It's going to be in the context of other artwork. And so I think we sort of, in the same way that a gallery wall is often white so that we don't kind of like bias the eye to other colors, I think we decided to, for as much as we were pushing the logo, it needed some simplicity in terms of color, and that would be brought in by the artwork that's around it.
I think kind of as part of the overall design, one of the things that I've always liked about sort of the evolution of it is that in some ways it very slyly, cleverly kind of uses what people expect, let's say a museum logo or a gallery logo, to be something they're somewhat familiar with if navigating or operating in those worlds, but uses that, tweaks it just enough, uses it to subvert it, right? So it's somewhat evocative or reminiscent of a logo that they might have seen before, but the changes in font make it distinct enough or deviate just enough from that norm to make it pop, to make it stand out, and to kind of get your attention.
I think another thing that was very of interest to me specifically was the glitch and the movement of the logo. We talked kind of a lot actually about process within this work, and one of the themes that has come out of our conversations with a lot of the artists is something that I also like to use within my own personal work, is this idea of continuous becoming, which I think is not necessarily about like, okay, we have to kind of strict to this kind of boxed way of identifying or being or showing up or how we're like presented. But we have the ability to change, and we can be kind of a part of this like fluid way of being. And I think that like removes this overwhelm, and in removing that overwhelm, that also removes this shame that can come from trying to kind of stick to one lane. And so when we were talking about, you know, this idea of process and continuous becoming, it felt necessary to make sure that also showed up in the logo being something that's continuously evolving, continuously changing. You know, you may go somewhere and even when it's stagnant, it may actually be different font types that you're seeing on the actual stagnant logo that you would see on the wall. But this kind of GIF logo existing in this virtual realm felt very important. And it's also something I think a lot of our artists take on, and a lot of the artists that you'll see that's part of this preview right now at Heartside are considering process. Like, how do you invite someone into the process of creating the work? And by inviting them into that process, you're inviting them into this understanding of how you live, how you exist, how you kind of navigate spaces, how you navigate life on a day-to-day. So I think all of those thoughts kind of went into this glitch and this kind of way of considering this motion and this movement and this process and this becoming that is happening. So I also just wanted to point that out and just say that was a really kind of important aspect of how the logo came about, came to be.
Also, some of the artists really pushed us to even push the legibility even further, including things such as Braille and even like reverse letters to represent those who might be dyslexic. Where I think on some of the more still marks, it felt like that was maybe pushing legibility even beyond what we were kind of comfortable with. In the animation, you will see the occasional flipped letter and things. So we tried to take their feedback and find ways to instill it. And it felt the animation was a perfect place for that.
John, could you talk a little bit more maybe about, you mentioned earlier in the presentation that by designing the logo in this way and factoring in all those considerations through the conversations we've had both internally and with artists about the disruptive nature of it is communicating something beyond legibility.
Yeah.
I wonder if you just talk a little bit more about what is being communicated to your mind beyond the legibility itself.
Yeah, I think seeing this sort of array of logos really it cemented this idea for me, because we could have very easily fell into looking exactly like the rest of the art world, and it just felt that that was really important not to. That if we're trying to disrupt this system that we think has issues, it felt like we just visually also needed to disrupt. It needed to look different. It needed to not conform, because that was already happening. And like not just once or twice, but just like throughout the whole industry. And so it felt that it was very important to kind of push that boundary, because we could so easily, fit nicely in. Which is sort of what people have always asked like so many people to do. Oh, just fit nicely in, don't stir things up, and we'll be fine. And it hasn't made the art world fine. It's sort of excluded a lot of people. So we just felt like because of that we just needed to take a different direction.
Yeah, and I as I'm looking at this slide, John, I'm just thinking about like the glitch that exists in the logo that we have, and just thinking about like if that glitch existed in all of these, like what would that state? That's like a form of disruption that I feel like is subtle but still very much so present, and I consider that to be a part of like the work that we're doing. This kind of subtle disruption, but something that's kind of like everlasting, because once something is glitched, I don't think it ever goes back to normal. It always has that glitch that kind of stays, or that presence, or that memory of what the glitch did, what the glitch meant. So that for me also felt really, really satisfying to have that part of our branding and our logo.
Yeah, and another thing that maybe just conceptually got baked into the logo is that oh, where am I going with this? Oh, there are some organizations out there that want to work with disabled artists and have these topics. But if they don't take the process right and don't want to do the hard work on their own, it's very easy to just sort of for that to get whitewashed. And so I think it was important also that in everything that the Art of Disruption does, that we really view the process in all of our back-end processes to make sure that we're being absolutely great to the artists that we're working with and the communities that we're working with.
Well, and so much of, if you look at sort of history and what has happened with disabled folks and other groups that have been marginalized, right? The emphasis has always been, for most of history, it's been about sort of fitting into whatever those dominant norms are, and trying to kind of shoehorn oneself into a very narrow set of parameters, and that by having the glitch, right, and what everything that the glitch represents, you can have a clean line, you can have something that's sort of non-disruptive, if you will. That's a sense of that it kind of comes from a place of privilege and a place of power, and that the glitch in and of itself disrupts that sense of power, that it creates or facilitates a new paradigm that those in power, or those who didn't have to think about disruption and kind of squashed any sense of disruption, now have to account for. And I really like how this process, this project, and this logo all are very evocative of that.
And when you talk about shoehorn, that's sort of exactly what I think when I think of like a strict sans serif face, is that it is a shoehorn. Like it's this structure that is applied to everything, and some letters fit into it great, and others do feel a little forced. And I think that is why we needed to sort of rebel against that, just because it, just structurally was there, whether we talked about it or not.
I want to make sure we leave space for anyone who has any questions about anything that we're going over.
I have a question for both of you. What are your, now that we've sort of, we're in the middle of this process, so to speak, what are your goals, or what are your intentions? Like, what would you like to see happen as a result of this logo and people's relationship to it?
Often when I think about a logo, I guess the interesting thing is that it's just one element of the whole thing. I actually sort of want, if for as much as we're talking about the identity right now, I'm excited for it to sort of, in some ways, blend into the background and really be there to celebrate and support the artists that are around it. So I actually hope that in the future that the discussion is not about the identity, but rather all of the work that's infused in around it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, and that happens because it will be moments where there will be this kind of questioning around the intention of the logo, and I think that's already kind of come up in our internal like discussions and dialogue. But I think outside of the logo, it's just existing to kind of support the work and kind of also like John said, kind of be an extension of like what we're doing in this process and what that has meant. But I do also appreciate that it is something that I think brings a slight discomfort in like our questioning around access. And that for me feels like a part of like why we're doing this work is to really consider these terms that exist around access, around disruption. I mean, even the beginning term that we kind of started with was, what is protest? What are these kind of themes around protest, like what has protest been, what is it now, how does it take place, like what kind of activation disruption happens, where does it happen, but also like in considering all of that, like again, considering these themes around access, this language, what does it mean? What does access actually mean? What does ableism mean? And are we expanding like our knowledge and our thoughts on that as a term? And when we do, like, what does that open up to, like how people can kind of enter into that space and not feel excluded? So that for me feels really important, and what I hope for with this branding and just with this work in general.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Angie, VUYST, asks, you mentioned earlier that disability isn't just physical, and there's a mention there of invisible disabilities. They say, as a neurodivergent individual, I'm curious about your thoughts on creating art, logos, etc., that consider sensory overload. I sincerely appreciate the symbolism, intention, thoughtfulness in every aspect of the logo, from the reverse letters to the glitch. When is sensory overload appropriate to consider in the creation process?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that that's why there's moments that can be a little more still, like what I'm showing here, and moments that can be animated. And there's moments where we will be playing with legibility, and there's other moments where we will be hyper compliant. And so I think it is a balance of that. Like if we were to like typeset like an artist card, like in the same style as the logo, that would be overwhelming to a max. Where I think we can get away with 4 words, and then other things need to go to the other extreme in terms of accessibility to balance out that. So yeah, you sort of need a balance of some clean space, some simple things to allow for this one sort of exuberant thing to live together.
And which ultimately, as it comes down, when it comes down to it, right, that is the creative process in essence, right? That's what creativity is all about. I think there's kind of an assumption, and even kind of a laziness in some ways out there in the world, where one can shoehorn access into saying, well, being compliant isn't creative or can't be creative. And so what I think this project does in a lot of ways is it, as you've mentioned, both mentioned, disrupts the comfortableness of that even. You know, it says, wait, can access be more? And if so, how do we facilitate that? And so in challenging ourselves, we're challenging everybody else to step outside of what those common assumptions have become.
And that's a really good point, because ADA compliance does not mean it's a great experience. It means it is the bare minimum of an experience that we say is acceptable in terms of accessibility. So my building it's technically ADA compliant. Like many buildings in downtown Grand Rapids, if you're in a wheelchair, you do need to go in the back by the dumpster and down a ramp to get to an elevator. It's not a great experience. So I think there is this balance of like ADA is not like the gold standard, it's the bare minimum. And so we do need to question it and what makes a great experience.
And
Yeah.
what is oh, sorry, go ahead, Len.
No, go ahead, Lawrence.
I was just going to say, the question that doesn't get asked a lot of times, unless you're kind of in the weeds doing this work, is what can access be beyond compliance, right? And so when we get beyond compliance, when we start thinking beyond compliance, we factor that in, but we don't stop there. That's where the magic happens. That's where the creativity happens, which is something artists should be doing.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I was just gonna agree and echo all of that, and just like, yeah, thinking about if we continue to kind of just like go with, these kind of, or conforming to these kind of guidelines, I don't think there's an openness to see what else is possible. So it feels really important to kind of push back against that, and sometimes refuse it as well, as a way to kind of open us up to new worlds, new language, new ways of existing. And also new communities and new ways of just like being together in that space with each other, and new ways of understanding So that feels really important in this work as well.
Also, just to follow up on the question about neurodivergency and the glitching and people being overwhelmed, I think this goes to the fact that like everything that DisArt does is not just one thing. Often there's spaces within the exhibition for that is more calm. There's spaces that can be more busy. So this isn't just taken in the identity itself. It's taken like it's a really holistic view. If you've ever been to a DisArt event, that there is sign language, that there is space to rest, and that's a little quieter. So that is taken into consideration across the board.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that it's not thought of, it's not even approached or related to in terms of how are we limited by this, but rather how much can we do? What are the boundaries and how can we push them? And what are the assumptions and how can we disrupt them? And what are the expectations and how can we subvert them? I mean, all of those things have sort of become part and parcel to the DisArt way of doing things, which means we don't always have all the answers, but we seem to be asking the right kinds of questions. Wondering if we can, are there any more? I know we're inching up on time. Any other questions that folks may have and want to ask again? Are there any thoughts that either of you had in the middle of the conversation that we haven't gotten to yet that you'd want to share or impart to folks?
No, I feel very, very good and very, I always say I feel held by this conversation. Well, if there's no additional questions, I mean, we'll still give it a few more minutes and some space, but I do want to just give gratitude to you, John, for this presentation, for also your work with the art of disruption and DisArt in general. It's been amazing to just be in partnership with you. So just thank you so much. And also just your thoughtfulness and intention and as well as sensitivity to the work that we're doing. I remember the first conversation that we had around this project. I think it was like we were on the call for maybe about 2 hours and going through these questions and just both of us like trying to, you know, better understand like what it is that we're actually doing. And I just really appreciate that. You know, a lot of times I think you can like work on something, but it really takes a lot of time and presence with that work. And I just want to say thank you so much for doing that, being that, and giving that to us.
Thank you so much.
Hey, why don't you give us a rundown of the events that are happening this week? Once again, before we close, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to take up 2 more minutes of your time, everyone. We have our second artist panel that's happening tomorrow evening. It will take place virtually on Zoom. And we will have artists Liza Sylvester, Christopher Robert Jones, which they are a duo based out of Indiana. And then we'll also have Jerome Ellis, who is based out of Virginia, talking about process, which I think will be a really exciting talk. Also on Friday, we'll be at the site, or excuse me, backtrack, Thursday night at the site, we'll have one of our final screenings of R.A. Walden's film, The Underlands, which is a really beautiful film. It's about 10 minutes long, but we'll be there for an hour, so come and go as you please. That will start at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. And then outside of that, on Friday afternoon at 12 noon, we'll have a community lunch in the park on the site. Please show up if you would like to help or to eat, whatever you know you would like to do. We'll be there from 12 to 1:30 for the lunch. And then also on Friday at 3 p.m., we will have an artist workshop with Jeff Casper. So please join in for that. That will be about an hour, hour and a half of time. On Saturday, we'll have a performance by Jerron Herman, which will take place. He's a movement-based artist, and that will take place at 4 p.m. On the site at Hardside Park. So please come to that if you have time. I think that would be a beautiful performance. We'll also have Jolie from Art Prize that will be there to talk a little bit about the Chris Smith Legacy Grant. And we'll have Chris's family members there to say a few words about Chris and to kind of honor his life and legacy at the site. So that would be a really special time. And then on Sunday, we have our final programming. We'll have a partnership activity with Reina Garcia. I believe Reina's on this call right now, which will be taking place at 4 p.m. It will be our kind of final activation on the site. So please, if you can, come out to that. And yeah, if you would like to follow along, I believe Lawrence put in the chat our link to our website, which has a full list of all of our events and everything that has been going on. We're really grateful to the city of Grand Rapids also for their support with this work for the past 2.5 weeks. And just really excited to be in community with you all.
Yeah, I would just like to, again, thank you both for everything that you brought to the conversation, that you're bringing to the project itself. If folks have had a seed planted or an idea sparked or would like to get more involved, we invite you to please come out to any or all of the events that Leandra just mentioned, and be there in real time, in real space, with real people, which is great to do there at Hardside Park in Grand Rapids. I did put a link in the chat to a donate link if folks are able to provide any kind of financial support or in that manner. We'd appreciate that as well. Thank you once again, everybody. I want to make just a closing thanks again to folks that have conspired and helped us do this project. The Ford Foundation, all the great folks there in Grand Rapids, the community, Steelcase Incorporated, National Endowment for the Arts, Art Prize, Conduit Studios, and John, Degage Ministries, Fast Signs, Sidecar Studios, SiteLab, and the Spanish Language Internship Project, or SLIP, out of the University of Michigan. So thank you, John, and thank you, Leandra, and hopefully we'll be seeing a lot of you at the events that are upcoming later this week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.